but more to search deep into our hearts, to ask if the things we set out to do were right or wrong, were good or bad. And I say that we have no regrets. We are completely unrepentant.
What does a leader say to a nation barely a year old, abandoned, uncertain, and surrounded by doubts? What can one say to a people just cast out of a larger political dream, left to survive on a barren island with no natural resources, no hinterland, and no guarantees? On August 9, 1965, Singapore was ejected from Malaysia. The merger had failed. The vision of a united multiracial Malaysia had collapsed under the weight of communal tensions and political rivalry. Left behind was a tiny state stripped of its regional identity, suddenly alone in an uncertain world. 1 year later, on August 9, 1966, Singapore's founding Prime Minister, Kuan Yew, delivered the first National Day rally, a defining moment where he reflected, reassured, and redefined what it meant to be Singaporean. The speech was more than a policy address. It was a blueprint for national survival. This is what Kuan Yew said, and why it still matters today.
Friends and fellow citizens, this time last year, my colleagues and I had already made a fateful decision on your and our behalf. In the nature of the circumstances, there was no time for consultations. We could not find out what the consensus would have been had we refused to acquiesce and insisted on going on with the kind of Malaysia which we envisaged it was at the time when we agreed to join.
The speech began not with triumphalism, but with somber realism. Singapore had not chosen separation, but they had to accept it for the country's survival. The founding leaders, knowing the emotional and political weight of separation, had made the decision alone under immense pressure. They had no time to consult or prepare the population. Yet what followed was not regret, but affirmation. Though the decision had been forced, it was ultimately the right one. The vision of a multiracial Malaysia, while noble in intent, had proven unworkable within the prevailing political realities.
It is useful this evening not to go back to the past, the whys and the wherefores, to apportion blame, but more to search deep into our hearts, to ask if the things we set out to do were right or wrong, were good or bad. And I say that we have no regrets. We are completely unrepentant that we set out to build a multiracial, for some time a multilingual, a multicultural community, to give a satisfying life to the many different kinds of people who forgathered here in over 150 years of the British Raj. And we, in the end, on balance, decided to carry on with our multiracial experiment, if you like, to call it, just in Singapore alone, rather than be forced into large-scale conflict in Malaysia. Nothing has altered, not the basic data, nor our basic thinking. What has altered are the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Lee's defiance here was not arrogance. It was ideological clarity. He wasn't just defending past actions, he was reaffirming a core principle: multiracialism. Even if it could not survive within Malaysia, it would be non-negotiable in Singapore. It was a moral and political foundation, something worth fighting for, even if it had to be done alone. By letting go of a flawed union, they preserved the core ideal of multiracialism and committed to building it anew, this time on their own terms.
It has been a year of great and sudden change. Very few countries in the world go through the kind of climacteric we have gone through. 61 to 63, we fought for merger, to sink ourselves in the identity of a bigger whole. 63 to 65, we found ourselves gradually embroiled in something which we half suspected but never quite admitted was possible within such a multiracial situation. And in 65, with decisive suddenness, we found ourselves asunder. And all the while, all the political unpleasantness that followed, we were making progress.
Lee traced the turbulent journey from the merger with Malaysia to separation, capturing not just a sequence of events, but the emotional upheaval Singaporeans endured. In just 4 years, Singaporeans were asked to embrace one national identity, then discard it, and form another. The trauma was profound. But amid the political bitterness, something extraordinary happened.
Imports went up, exports went up. These are facts and figures, not fictions of the imagination of my colleague, the Minister of Finance. They are checked against every indent that goes in and out of the Harbour Board, the Singapore Port Authority. They are checked against our revenue on the same rates of taxation. The number of factories, people they employ, the goods they produce, the value, the houses being built. And they tell a story which I think we have very little to be ashamed of. Almost in spite of ourselves, we forge ahead. Revenue up 10%, economy surging forward. I'm not saying that this will be so for all time with no effort on our part. But I say we will progress so long as we reward initiative and resourcefulness. And as long as whenever we face peril, courage and resolve is never found wanting.
This is one of the most remarkable facts of Singapore's early independence. Its economy didn't falter despite the political upheaval. It thrived. The country's resilience was not due to luck, but due to sound leadership, prudent management, and a relentless focus on stability. Lee's message was clear. Singapore may have been small and politically isolated, but it was economically alive and getting stronger. Then came the heart of his message.
We believed, and we still believe, that salvation lies in an integrated society. I use the word advisedly, integrated as against assimilated. I would not imagine for one moment a Singapore government trying to assimilate everybody. 75% Chinese trying to convert 10% Tamils and Hindus and Tamil Muslims and Northern Indian Muslims into good old Chinamen. Or not even good old Chinamen, good old overseas Chinese Singapore brand, Singapore type. I wouldn't try it. It's not worth the effort. Nor would I try it with the other groups. Why should we try the impossible? But I say integration is possible. Not to make us one grey mass against our will, against our feelings, against our inclinations, but to integrate us with common values, common attitudes, a common outlook, certainly a common language, and eventually a common culture.
Lee drew a vital distinction between integration and assimilation, rejecting the idea that harmony required cultural erasure. Instead, he championed a vision where unity could emerge from diversity, grounded in shared values rather than shared ethnicity. This philosophy became the cornerstone of Singapore's nation-building. English was adopted as a neutral working language. Public housing implemented ethnic quotas to ensure that no racial enclaves could form, and meritocracy ensured equal opportunity regardless of race. Today, this model thrives. Major festivals from all communities are celebrated nationally. Schools teach a common civic identity, and national service unites young men across backgrounds. In politics, leadership remains visibly multiracial, reinforcing inclusiveness at the highest levels. This approach has enabled Singapore to become one of the world's most stable and successful multiracial societies, a direct outcome of Lee's early leadership.
For so many other countries in this part of the world are faced with the multiracial societies that gradually form themselves over the period of colonial rule. And broadly speaking, there are two ways in which we in Singapore can set the pace. First, prove that the migrant element is dynamic, is thrustful, is industrious, and can get on. Of that I have no doubts. The other is to demonstrate how a forward-looking, not a backward-looking, not looking to the past for examples, for patterns of behavior and conduct, completely irrelevant in the modern society that we find ourselves. Man reaching out for the moon and the stars, and we don't find our solutions by turning up the dusty pages of some chronicler in some ancient time telling us about some ancient customs more relevant to his days. But that forward, inquiring outlook, keen to learn, keen to make a success of the future. And if we can give everyone, regardless of race, language, culture, an equally satisfying life, then surely that must be a benevolent or a beneficial influence on the whole region.
Lee then broadened the lens, placing Singapore's multiracial challenge within a wider regional context. Across Southeast Asia, newly independent nations were grappling with ethnic divisions inherited from colonial rule, many descending into strife. Singapore, he argued, had a chance to break that pattern. Its success could prove that a multiracial society need not be divided or dysfunctional. In this, Singapore was both a test case and a potential model. Failure would reinforce regional pessimism. Success could reshape expectations. But Lee's message wasn't rooted in idealism. It was grounded in urgency. In a volatile region, social cohesion was essential for national security and survival. Singapore had to show that forward-thinking governance, not clinging to outdated customs, could turn diversity into strength. By ensuring that every community had a fair shot at a fulfilling life, Singapore could become not just a stable state, but a beacon of possibility for a fractured post-colonial world.
We suffered setbacks. 1964, 2 communal riots. And we don't pretend to ourselves that they weren't communal riots. They were. We face facts. And this is one of the greatest strengths about Singapore, its willingness to face reality. the 9th of August, we used to celebrate the 3rd of June. Then it was the 16th of September when we promulgated Malaysian. Then it went back to the 31st of August because other people celebrated the 31st of August. Then it has to be the 9th of August. But the 9th of August it is. Not because we wish it to be, but because it was.
Lee then confronted the painful truths of Singapore's past, and it was his brutal honesty that sets him apart. Many leaders whitewash history, but not Lee. By acknowledging that the racial riots of 1964 had torn at the fabric of society, he diffused denial and prepared the ground for healing. Lee's unwavering commitment to confronting harsh realities, no matter how uncomfortable, was a vital ingredient in Singapore's survival. Then, he turned to the symbolism of National Day on 9th August. Singapore had not marched into sovereignty with banners waving. It had been pushed off the cliff and forced to fly. But the date, though accidental, was now theirs. It was not about how independence came, but what the country did with it.
This capacity to face up to situations, however intractable, however unpleasant, is one of the great qualities for survival. A people able to look facts squarely in the face, calculate the odds, weigh the chances, and then decide to go in, are a people not likely to go under. And when this time last year, before the news was broken to the world, my colleagues and I carried that heavy burden in our hearts of having made the decision on your behalf. We consoled ourselves with this thought, that whilst thereafter that multiracial society which we had set out to create can only be implemented within the confines of Singapore, we knew deep down that ultimately its impact must spread far beyond its shores. No geographic or political boundary can contain the implications of what we set out to do when we succeed.
Lee underscored that survival depended not on natural resources, but on the character of a people willing to confront hard truths. Singapore's strength lay in its ability to face reality, make tough decisions, and persevere with conviction. This was not just about national survival, it was about shaping a broader narrative. If Singapore could succeed in building a cohesive, multiracial society, its impact would extend far beyond its shores. Decades on, that vision has proven remarkably foresighted. Singapore may not be perfect, but it stands as powerful evidence that a diverse society can thrive in unity. In hindsight, that first National Day rally was not just a speech. It was a declaration of national character. It defined the stakes, the struggle, and the standards. Kuan Yew spoke that night not just as a politician, but as a builder laying the first stone of a nation. And that stone, solid, grounded, unyielding, still supports the weight of Singapore's success today. Yet, that same resolve also drew criticism. Lee has often been accused of being authoritarian, with some arguing that he intruded into the private lives of citizens. But to him, such control was not only justified, it was essential for survival. Why did he believe this was necessary? Watch this video to find out more.